work that I'm doing and how it links with pretty much a lot of the pressing questions for today, most specifically agriculture and food security. My background is in environmental science. I did my undergrad at Makerere, as I've been introduced, and I went on to do my master's in geography and environment engineering at the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, before I started my PhD in geographical sciences, and I primarily focused on mapping agriculture drought, which led into in the Karamoja region in northeastern Uganda, which led me to looking more into broader agriculture and food security monitoring using remote sensing and available technologies. And today I will, kind of talk about how we are using satellite Earth observations at the University of Maryland in the Department of Geographical Sciences and primarily under the NASA habits. I've done a little bit of other work, including mapping refugee settlements using drones, primarily in Uganda, and I'm also interested in landslide mapping, just broadly the applications of satellite data to different questions, because sometimes the methods apply across. And so basically the foundation, which everybody I think who's at this conference understands, is that we have a lot of data, satellite remote sensing data that we can use to analyze pretty much any point on Earth, and we can get insights about what's going on pretty much everywhere in the world. And this, even though we've had many, many years of these data, some of the limitations on accessibility have been, pretty great in terms of people not being able to analyze the data. So when I was doing my undergrad, it was at a time when we, would take a couple of days. I think even now it can take a couple of days to download, a specific kind of data if you want to use it on your local machine. But more recently, in the last 5 or so years, there's been, an increased accessibility to cloud computing. So while I was doing my PhD in our department, we started a computing cluster for us to be able to do more faster analyses of data and work through many more complex problems as well as study larger areas. But in the last couple of years, more and more people have access to the cloud through systems like the Google Earth Engine, as well as, the burst in more interest from the machine learning community to, use Earth observations and get insights out of it. In addition to the fact that the cost of accessing a lot of really critical data has become pretty low and free, and to be able to do reasonable good analysis. So with Sentinel-2 and Landsat data, as well as accessibility to pre-process MODIS data, makes it possible for anybody anywhere to be able to do analyses. However, despite all of this, we still see massive events with significant impacts on populations, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. Now more, I guess, in the past year or so, there's been significant drought events and wildfires that have created great concern, even for example in Europe and in the United States. But you find that for a lot of sub-Saharan African countries, these events have been the norm. This is Cyclone Idai from March 2019. And you can see from this image the amount of damage that resulted from flooding. This is a Sentinel-1 image of that cyclone. You can see the size of the area. What will be interesting to show this map actually will be to include infrastructure like buildings, roads and stuff like that were, basically flooded. And so you find, looking at it from the ground, that many people were displaced. An estimated, over 1,200 deaths were reported, and, millions of people were impacted. However, add to this conflict, for example, that was ongoing in Mozambique, And Idai was followed by another cyclone, Kenneth. It's just, an incredible amount of things that communities are facing. What's also interesting or not interesting or kind of difficult to, two things exist in the same situation where those things happen and the communities that are on the front lines, pretty much hit by surprise. We have sufficient information from satellite technology or data and systems to understand what might happen, what could happen. So this is showing that same time period, looking at the amount of rainfall that was happening in Southern Africa. If you look to the bottom left of the map, looking at Western Africa, there'd been a drought. And then we have Cyclone Idai in the middle, where the dark blue is, plus 100% more rainfall, for example, millimeters of rainfall recorded at that time period. And then you're seeing a drought in Eastern Africa right here, starting in Kenya. Just looking at what it looked like, it was one of the driest years between 1981 and 2019. And this information was available and accessible, even to kind of forecast and be able to provide information in a timely way. And so we track this type of stuff within our department, within a program that started under GeoGLAM, which is the Group on Earth Observations Global Work Monitoring Initiative. And, surely enough, by the end of the growing season of 2019, we find that crops had failed in parts of Kenya completely. So this is, where food security comes in. And just going back in terms of timelines, we're looking at one event after another. We have a drought, a cyclone Idai, then cyclone Kenneth. We have flooding. We have, many people being affected by flooding and landslides in Uganda around June of 2019. This was followed by reported crop failure in Kenya, in Somalia, in Uganda, in Tanzania, and South Sudan. This is all still in 2019. We have heavy rains and flooding afterwards, also in Uganda, in South Sudan, Tanzania, and it's kind of sad that it's one event after another, and then going forward into the locusts. And then further, this is all happening before COVID-19. So you can imagine the system is already in distress, then the pandemic happens. So I think everybody recognizes that food security is one and all should be one of the most pressing issues facing a lot of sub-Saharan African countries. I don't think you can have happy people when they're hungry. I don't think you can guarantee security when people do not have, cannot feed their families. And these extreme events, one after another, are making, reaching SDG number 2 much, much, much further away. And so recognizing that, and this photograph represents, what a person had, a family, I think it was a family of 6 had on that day for food. It's quite, incredibly challenging. And it can be worse. This is an example from Karamoja, where I did my PhD. I was doing fieldwork that time, looking at food insecurity, and you find that many people in the Karamoja region, in this particular year, I think this was 2017, this is all a person had in storage on that day. Moving forward. So yeah, we're farther away from SDG number 2. It's incredibly difficult, but in terms of technology, data solutions, data-backed solutions, be it improving market supply, accessibility to information, it is possible that we could do things a lot better and can help a lot more people, as well as can, make better decisions. That's where my work comes in. So primarily I work under the NASA Harvest program, where I lead our Africa initiative. This is NASA's contribution to the Group on Earth Observations Global Agriculture Monitoring Initiative, which is under GEO, the Group on Earth Observations. And the goal of Harvest is to advance the adoption of satellite technology to improve agriculture and food security decisions, basically working with across many landscapes, and partners. And cross-cutting themes are improving yield and crop conditions monitoring, early warning, markets and trade through knowing things like crop conditions across larger scales, advancing methods for crop type and crop area mapping. And on the right-hand side of this are sort of broader themes, including applications of emerging technologies, machine learning, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, and IoT. And this is just kind of an overview of the framework under our Africa program. I mean, it applies even in other geographies, but I like this because it depicts a smallholder farmer working in their field, collecting satellite data, which, is something that's almost automatic, goes on almost across the whole world. We combine the satellite data, time series data, if it's daily, monthly, or bi-monthly, into composites, extracting time series information, that then we use machine learning, deep learning approaches to extract information like crop type, cropland crop type, crop conditions, and hopefully that this can go directly and feed into decision making. It's incredibly challenging, I should say, to do this in a smallholder context. And I think most of you are familiar with the complexity, but maybe have not thought about it in terms of when you're looking at it from satellite data. That smallholder agriculture, not only is it critical for food security because it's supportive systems that farmers face a lot of challenges, including low inputs, low productivity, pests and diseases, and sometimes policies that are not supporting what farmers actually need. But from a mapping perspective, it's incredibly challenging. So we're having very small fields that are mixed, have multiple crops in them, which is good for the fields, not necessarily great for remote sensing. And so methods have to be developed to kind of lead towards understanding mixed cropping systems. We have agroforestry and pasture, right next to crop fields. We have irregular field boundaries, intercrop, mixed field. And the fact that a lot of the agriculture in sub-Saharan Africa is rain-fed makes it incredibly challenging because we have a lot of cloud cover when we're looking at satellite imagery. Moving on. So some of our priorities are these: improving the systems that are used for monitoring and early warning, advancing the methods that underpin the data that go in those systems. So I'll explain that a little bit. And then developing and transferring capacity, working with national and local users, and then having strong long-term sustainable partnerships. And so this is our crop monitor initiative. This just shows where we're monitoring crop conditions using satellite data, both in exporting countries, larger producer countries like the US, Russia, and China, looking at crops like maize, wheat, soy, and rice. And understanding how production is in those countries can have significant impact on global productivity. And so still on the systems, we spend a lot of efforts towards improving accessibility to satellite data. So having the GLAM system on the bottom right, as well as the Early Warning Explorer on the top right, developed by UCSB, University of California, Santa Barbara, where you can access rainfall temperature information. It's really great actually for research too. I can tell you that from my PhD research, I relied a lot on downloading data from the GLAM system to look at time series and look at historical drought conditions. So you can do the same. And then we developed this crop monitor system in which the map from the previous slide comes from, which allows analysts to go in and assess crop conditions and use additional information they might have to kind of talk about what's happening in that region. And then, of course, we collect a lot of ground data and depend largely on the Open Data Kit, ODK, for ground data collection, as well as other really cool tools that I'll mention a little bit about, one that we're working on currently. Advancing the methods that underpin the data that go into the system. So when you go into the GLAM system, you might want to look at crop conditions. So you will need a crop mask. And so we are developing machine learning approaches to extracting this information, developing crop type, cropland map, for example, this from 2010 for Kenya, going into crop type. This is a map of the common bean for Busia. It's a prediction of where common beans would be in Kenya. And we've applied the methods in Togo, in Mali, in Rwanda. We're currently developing the product for Uganda, as well as other African countries with support from AGRA, NASA Severe, as well as the Swiss Re Foundation. And the other methods that we're working on are yield and crop conditions. This work is led by Dr. Ritvik Sachpa. And it's basically, he's developed a framework for using satellite data for forecasting yield. Pretty much close to mid-season, you get a pretty good understanding of what might happen at the end of the season. And then we're replicating that approach across multiple countries, being cognizant, of course, of the fact that a lot of the data that are needed for training are missing. And then we work a lot on ground data collection, as I mentioned. So we are developing approaches to collecting ground data, including working with extension agents across multiple countries, including in Uganda, Tanzania, Mali, and also more recently we have a project called Helmets Labeling Crops. This is kind of, I would call it like the logo, but it's just showing the partners on the project, including Reforum in Uganda, as well as Makerere University and Sokoine University of Agriculture. What we're doing in this project is basically we have people driving a car or a motorbike, the helmet, we call the motorbike helmet. They are carrying a GoPro camera and collecting images as they ride. And then we pre-process the images, straighten them, clear them, clean them, and then run them through a computer vision algorithm to extract or predict what the crops are. And then we have to offset, because the image is taken as a person is riding a bike on the road, we have to offset from the point of where the photo is taken to the actual field that we're mapping. So moving it from A to B as the final label. So we need an actual location and a crop type to be able to develop crop type maps, for example. Let's see. This is our workflow for making sure that we can streamline and make things replicable. A lot of our methods and data are actually publicly available and accessible. For example, the LSTM, the long short-term memory neural network method for developing cropland maps is actually accessible on our GitHub, and with clear instructions on how to run it on your own. So I invite students who might be interested in exploring some of the machine learning approaches to take a look at that. And I've already kind of spoken about this, so I can skip over it. But I just wanted to show you a picture of a helmet. This is Edric. He is based at Mubuku Irrigation Scheme in Kasese district in Uganda. And like basically, as you see on the right, as you're driving in the car, images are being taken, and we extract information from those images to create to create a label data points, as you can see here from field work that we did a couple of months ago in Uganda. Moving on, I'm almost at the end. This was just to show kind of like the workflow for that. And this is for crop classification, the long and short-term memory that I spoke about, extracting information using label data, time series data to classify and get your cropland map. Next is going towards crop type mapping. This is a meta-learning model, which basically was developed because we have a lot fewer labels for crop type. And so this meta-learning was basically works really well in those instances, and we're trying to develop it so we can develop more crop type maps that are important for understanding production for specific maps, monitor conditions for specific crops, as well as forecast yield for specific crop and not generically crops. This is an example of the common bean map that I showed before, as well as coffee in Brazil. Also, this is kind of demonstrating robustness of the methods, because it's the same method applied using global training data sets to extract information about very specific crops in different geographies at the same time. And so we do a lot of capacity development. I've worked with institutions across Eastern Africa primarily, as well as in Mali, training on the crop monitor, on the GLAM systems. We've held a few meetings and training workshops in East Africa. And we also do work with students actually. And I've done, for example, GeoWikis with Makerere and Sokoine University. And as well as we at some point we're trying to establish a working relationship with the Nelson Mandela University in Tanzania as well. Moving on. So we also work with extension agents, as I mentioned. They're primarily collecting a lot of the ground data using ODK. And I wanted to mention that, program is a partnership. This is the sum of the partners that we have. And we love to, learn and work and leverage each other's expertise so that we can get the best outcome for the communities we're trying to support. Just a little bit about impact. The crop monitors that I mentioned that are based on this crop monitor for AMIS, which is one focusing on bigger producer countries, and then one for early warning, looking at countries that are at risk of food insecurity. The process and workflow has been adapted for the crop monitor for Eastern Africa, run by the IGA Timber Predictions and Applications Center. And the crop monitors are operational in Tanzania, in Kenya, and in Uganda. There is one being finalized for operation in Rwanda. And some of the outputs from the crop monitor are being used in Mali, and as well as this one being developed for Ethiopia. And in terms of impact, this is just coming out of my PhD. I like to show this because it's kind of like a very simple, straightforward analyses using the GLAM system, looking at anomaly, vegetation anomaly at the time. This is from 2015. This was used in a report that was presented to the Office of the Prime Minister, that led to a unanimous decision to send food aid to the Karamoto region. So it's like a tool that already existed that anybody could access and find this information, contextualize it with what's available on the ground to provide actionable information. Also using the GLAM system, we developed that disaster risk financing trigger mechanism, basically integrating the time series data accessible through the GLAM system into analyses to determine severity of drought across the region in order to determine when to trigger this financing scheme. By around close to the end of 2019, through the program funded by the World Bank, approximately 300,000 individuals had been supported through it directly. Another example from Togo, basically that long short-term memory model that I presented about previously was used to extract or derive a crop land map for Togo for 2019. This was done in 2020. And this was to feed into the Siolim program, which is e-wallet, basically same as mobile money, to send mobile money to farmers. What the ministry was trying to determine is where are the majority of our farmers that might be impacted by COVID-19 to determine, to be able to send them support. And if you want to read more about our work, I have some of these links and can be shared, through the conference, as well as additional information. I can also provide that if anybody's interested. And that's all from, more generally about our work for agriculture monitoring. As I mentioned before, I've done a little bit of work on refugee settlement mapping, and most recently started looking into using deep learning to understand the relationship between burned area and refugee settlements, whether there are changes in burned area and how those might in consequence affect the refugee communities as well as the host communities, but generally the broader region that where settlements are located. I will stop there since it's almost at the half hour, and we'll be glad to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Yeah, for that, elaborate, eye-opening into how digital data has been really applied in enhancing and monitoring not only in agriculture, but also the environment in Africa. And also, your work which has contributed to, the Karamoja region in Uganda. So at this moment, I would like to invite maybe some questions or comments to Prof concerning her keynote speech. Yeah, as maybe people think, we have seen, Prof, that really the digital data is available, and researches have been done here and there. Case in example, what you did in Uganda, and an attempt done really to put this into, or to inform a policy with the visit to the Prime Minister's office. But generally, this is a big challenge, that most of the research remains basically on the desks, and good research, but it fails to transition into government processes and or interventions. In your view, with the experience you have working in Africa, how do you think that such an issue, how can we convert, how can we approach, how can we convert the research into processes and also policies that inform not only agriculture, but also monitoring our environment, or in the disaster in countries like in Africa? Thank you, Prof.
Great. A really, really important question, and one that I personally am also constantly trying to find solutions to. I think while there's recognizing that, researchers are doing really great work, and it has to be appreciated, particularly people who work, within institutions in Africa, like that, their efforts are really important. They understand the problems to the level of detail that, it needs to be understood. But I think one of the problems that we have is there's a lack in integration between research and government decision making. Or one example I guess I can think of right now is the model in a lot of within the U.S., for example. The government funds specific research initiatives that are run out of universities, not for politics or anything like that, but potentially to come up with real tangible solutions. And those solutions, because of how the programs are designed or funded, directly feed into a decision-making process, be it a solution for water pollution. Then I think those things don't necessarily exist. So we don't have, thinking about like how Uganda is, and I might be wrong, there are very few opportunities for this. There's very limited funding that enables this transition of research into operation. And that's, really something that has to be addressed. I think recognizing the importance of science in improving our society and being able to support that at the level that it needs to be supported. One of the points that I've been thinking about or talking about lately is that the amount that we invest in our security, think about, military, we should invest a lot more in things like food security or water access or water security, where we're trying to ensure that communities have access to the best of those. And so it requires that, we seek out the best technology, but then also set up institutions that can take this technology up. And I think this is really, significantly lacking. I might be wrong, but I don't know any center that is directly funded in that way for at least the work that I'm directly involved in. There might be others, but I have not known many. Also, you find that, government institutions don't have research arms like that are really, really funded to the level that they should be. So like the National Agriculture Research institutions, for example, they require a lot more robust funding and mechanisms for rolling out and scaling what they've found and discovered. So if there's a type of maize that is robust and resilient, the research arm should have the resources to be able to scale it and share it and communicate it, in a much, much broader way than it's currently being done. And that requires investment. But also, I guess the last point I'll make is that recognition that decision makers need to recognize this. So politicians or the government needs to recognize that there's a huge lag between solutions, unless it's something, urgent and life-threatening. There's very limited interest in creating a clear pathway from research to operation for a lot of solutions that are being developed.